My name is Steve Maxwell, and I am a father, a grandfather, business entrepreneur, and co-founder of Citizens Defending Freedom. Remnant Alliance started when the leaders of Citizens Defending Freedom met up with some leaders in other ministries that were working with churches. But really it began by a group of people sitting in a room saying, you know what, we've got to do this God's way. We've got the scriptures. What do the scriptures teach us? There's one promise, a great promise, 2 Chronicles 7:14, that says, and the promise is to heal the land. How can we heal our land? Our land's sick right now. How do we heal it? And it's very clear. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I'll come heal their land. So it's a roadmap. So a lot of organizations think this is political. So they try to get someone else elected or something. And this is so much deeper and so much bigger than that. So we said, you know what, we've got to engage God's people. And then you begin to look at the stories in the Bible. And first of all, you realize God never used a crowd. He always used a remnant.
I was making a trip north. My wife's grandmother had passed away and the family had asked me to come perform her funeral service. And we were driving up Interstate 75 and had the radio on, and all programming was paused so that we could hear President Trump announce that the country was shutting down for 15 days. And even for someone like me who had not been that involved, I knew that was wrong. Everything in me said, this is not right. This should not be happening in our country. So as soon as I made it to my sister's house where we were staying for that trip, I began to get online and call friends and try and reach out to leaders that had mentored me and to find some sort of guidance and help. And all I saw was panic, fear, people bowing down to that. There really wasn't any strong leadership coming from the church, and I didn't have any answers. And people were calling me, and again, didn't understand why all this was bothering me. I just knew that this was wrong. And then when I came back home, people that I had been with, ministered with, worshiped with, served in this community with for 20 years in this conservative little town, their reactions were all out of order. And this kind of crisis brought to the surface the fact that the Christianity that we had was a thin veneer over what was a very secular mindset. My friend Steve Maxwell invited me to come to a meeting at his offices in Mulberry. I wasn't sure why. When I showed up there were a lot of really important people around the table, and I didn't know that I belonged. So, my tendency there is just, be still and see if you can get out of there without saying much. But Steve won't let that happen. And so the question was asked, what do you think we should do? What do you think the answer is? And I was really the last person in the circle, so I listened to great answers about passing legislation and, how business could affect it. But when it got to me, the only answer, and I had a lot of time to think about this, the only answer that came to my mind was the local church. The local church is the answer. If there is any way that we save this culture now, it has to start in the local church. Our little community was getting some of that fracturing, some of that tension, racial tension and animosity was going on. We found out that we had a very active group of atheists who they were doing crazy stuff. They were organizing protests outside of our police station, putting a great deal of pressure on the city staff. Somebody even rigged it so that we had a transgendered atheist who offered the invocation at our city commission, just crazy things like that. And then we had a very controversial city election in the spring of 2021. And two people won who were concerning to me, and they both won by less than 50 votes. And it went from bad to worse. And then 3 months after that election, the commissioner that sat in the seat, the district that I live in, was arrested and charged with a felony. So she had to surrender her seat, and there was an opening that had to be filled by appointment of the commission until the next election, and I was asked to fill that seat. And I agreed to do that. I guess there was a noticeable shift. I would go to every commission meeting nervous, didn't know anything about local politics. I'm praying all the way, hoping I don't make a fool out of myself, trying to learn what it meant to be a city commissioner. So every commission meeting, I would pray a prayer I learned from the Apostle Paul that I would go in the full measure of the grace of Christ. And something happened. Things began to change. The meetings became almost overnight less contentious. And then people began to ask me to consider to run for mayor, which is up in the next election cycle. And I wasn't interested. I kept them at arm's length. And then I went to a meeting in Sebring, and a state legislator gave the speech that night. And it was all about how God had called him to the political realm. And I felt that. And then as I was walking out to my car to exit that night, I got a text from one of the city staff. And all it said was, "Thank you for serving. Your presence has made a huge difference." And I got in my car for the 45-minute ride home. I was going to turn the radio on, and as soon as I reached over to turn on the radio, I heard a voice that every Christian recognizes, the Spirit of God, and it was God saying, "No, leave the radio off. You and I are going to talk." And for 45 minutes home, I wrestled with the Lord in prayer, and I knew I was being called to run. And I said, "God, that seems so arrogant. It seems so preposterous that the pastor of a local church would want to be the mayor of an entire city." But I agreed to run. I was kind of hoping that all I had to do was agree to run and not win, but I won. And so that's how I became the mayor of Lake Wales. I had to give up the seat number 4 on our city commission, and we wanted to make sure that a good, godly, conservative person won that seat. So 4 weeks, on the very week where they had to qualify, we found another member of High Point Church to run, and he got qualified. And then we worked really hard on some key precincts. We had kind of done the work and found out that there were 2 big precincts where we had very low voter turnout. And we worked hard on those 2 precincts. And we increased voter turnout from 1,500 to 2,500 in 1 year. And both I and the other candidate from my church won election. And really because on the strength of those 2 precincts, just working those 2 precincts. And then the next year here in Lake Wales, we had 2 more seats come open, and we had 1 seat that had been held by the same person for 16 years. And really, there needed to be a change in that seat, but the district line was one where she was pretty dominant. But because of the census that year, district lines had shifted 2 blocks to the east. And we were sitting in an office here at the church and pulled out a map and looked, and we knew of a good, godly person that because of the shift was now 1 block inside her line. 6 weeks before the election, we recruited that person to run. We ran the same strategy, and he won that election. So we're 4 of the 5 current commissioners were people that we backed in the last 2 elections. So there are 17 municipalities in our county, and we looked. The numbers are, all except for Lakeland, 3,500 votes or less in every municipal election. And most of those are decided by 300 votes or less. So what if you could get 1 church in every city to really work hard to do that kind of work of doing the precinct work and finding out which ones to focus on and get behind 1 candidate and work for them to get elected? If you can swing 200 votes, you can win an election. I know a lot of you pastors, maybe all of you, probably all of you, deeply love the church and deeply feel your responsibility to lead the church well. And you look out at the culture and it overwhelms you, and you want to make a difference and you don't even know where to begin. And I just want to encourage you to engage in Remnant Alliance. I was in the very same position you're in right now, feeling overwhelmed, knowing I needed to do something and not knowing how to get started. And Remnant Alliance walked in and put the toolbox in my hands, and I was able to unpack all of the resources and begin to lead my church into effective kingdom cultural engagement. For that reason, I would encourage you, jump in on Remnant Alliance.